Like, I was sobbing last night after I finished this book. It was so beautiful. Hi, my name is Allie. Welcome to my channel where we chat about all things bookish. Today I'm reviewing At the End of the River Styx by Michelle Kulwicki. Let's get into the book stats. At the End of the River Styx was written by Michelle Kulwicki and was published by Page Street YA on the 24th of September in 2024. It is 384 pages long and it is a YA fantasy book. It is currently available in hardback, ebook, and audiobook. In terms of representation, At the End of the River Styx has an Achillean romance going on, as well as mental illness and other disability representation. After reading the author's own journey through mental illness and grief, I would classify this as own voices when it comes to disability representation. In terms of content warnings, At the End of the River Styx deals with content such as grief, car crashes, mental illness, death of a parent, suicide, and alcohol. Before we get started on the review, I do want to give a shout out to NetGalley and Page Street YA for providing me with a free e-arc in exchange for an honest review. This book is about love and grief and how they intertwine, and at its heart, it's a story about two boys. Bastian Barnes barely survived the horrendous car crash, but his mother did not. Heavy with guilt and with grief, Bastian uses his mother's inheritance money to buy an old, rundown bookstore, just trying to feel closer to the memories of her. But Bastian is failing his high school classes, he's fighting off daily panic attacks, his friends want him to be the old Bastian again, and his twin brother Dorian has seemingly moved on and healed from his grief. On the flip side, we have Alexander, who is riddled with grief after his mother dies to an illness. After rifling through her old pagan books, Alexander finds out that he can sacrifice himself and commit himself to 500 years of servitude to the ferryman in exchange for his mother's life. And that's exactly what he does. Zan has spent 499 years, the longest anyone has lasted, serving under the ferryman and is so close to getting his soul and his life back. Then a strange boy keeps showing up, seemingly unwilling to go over to death and to the ferryman. Bash shouldn't have survived that car crash and he is marked for death. It is up to Zan to bring him to the ferryman in order to fulfill his duties and have his own life. But Bastian makes Zan feel more alive than he's ever felt. And Zan makes Bastian feel seen and feel like himself again. This book was such a beautiful and raw depiction of grief and loss. We're really focused on Bash's grief out of the two, and I think it was a very authentic understanding and representation of grieving, of depression, of anxiety, trauma, and mental illness. Between Dorian and Bash grieving in their different ways, their friends getting upset with Bastian's attitude and snippiness throughout his grief, Bastian making not so great choices in order to combat his emotions, and the way in which Zan and Bash feel comfort and can relate to each other. All of this was so authentic and real. I rated At the End of the River Styx 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed the story, I really enjoyed the emotions, and the characters felt so alive, and I was hooked into the story from the get-go. Now, the book is written in third-person POV, and I think that the POV is kind of what lost me. We're mostly focused on Bastian and his inner thoughts and his world, but sometimes the POV would switch to talking about Zan's inner thoughts and his emotions. And so that switch was not necessarily as clear as I think it could have been, and sometimes it would take me a second to realize that we had switched to someone else's POV. In terms of pacing, I thought the book was paced really well, but on the flip side, I also think it could have benefited from 50 more pages. And I think that's just me wanting more of this story, wanting more time spent with Bash and Zan. But ultimately, I rated it 4.5 stars, and I really, really loved the book. The story of two boys who found life in each other, these raw emotions of love and grief and how they intertwine in the most bittersweet way, made me cry. I was sobbing last night after I finished this book. It was so beautiful. If you enjoy YA queer fantasy books, if you enjoy these themes of mental illness and grief and love, I would highly, highly recommend this book. Thank you so much again to Page Street YA for publishing this book and providing me with a free e-arc. And I can't wait to see both what Michelle Kulwicki writes next and what Page Street YA publishes next.